remarks and for putting a perspective on this particular situation. Up next, I would like to invite retired Major Venant Ndigila, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, from the Red Cross. He is the manager in charge of preparedness and response, and I believe his experience in responding to the disaster-affected areas will give us some insight and probably set the pace for the conversations that will take place later on this afternoon. Karibu sana Major, and we are happy to have you here. Thank you for making time to join our webinar on such short notice, and we're really excited to have you here and to hear from you on what it is to be at the forefront of dealing with this particular issue. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Florence. Sorry, how much do I have? I mean, how much time?
10 minutes. You have 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So, Madam President, other members present, thank you very much. We really appreciate for the AAK reaching out to us or reaching out to the Kenya Red Cross to participate in this very, very important session. We'd like to say that this is some of the forums which we really need in this country in the efforts towards supporting those who have suffered or have been affected by the various disasters in Kenya, because we do believe that the profession of architectures, I hope I'm correct, is very, very important, especially in matters shelter and general reconstruction after disasters like floods. Allow me to share a presentation as I try to give the picture of the effects of the recent floods in the country. Yeah, there we are. So this is the floods update as on 16th, that is yesterday. And the picture we can see there is the recent effects of floods in Lamu. And this picture was taken sometimes towards early, around 1st to 4th of June. This is the latest county to feel the effects of floods. As we may all know, it is at the lower coast. And despite the rains in central Kenya, which means the effects being felt downstream in lower Tana, the coastal region has been receiving rains up to as late as yesterday. This season's rain started in early March. However, there are quite a number of counties in the country, especially West Kenya, which really never stopped receiving rain since last year, the October-November season. They actually transited from the October, November, December, and they continue receiving rains up to the start of this long rain season in March. So we can try to imagine the level of effects which they have felt since then. So in our records, what we have recorded so far, we have 49,088 households which have been displaced. So being displaced is one way or the other. They have to leave their homes, they have to leave their dwellings in order to go and seek temporary shelter in other places. Mind you, they might have lost their houses through total destruction, partial destruction, or simply their houses are inhabitable. 69,962 households have been affected one way or the other. It means they have lost, maybe despite their housing, they have lost food in their granaries, they have lost livestock, they have lost farmland. They have been affected one way or the other. The number in the bracket is the total population. We are estimating 5 people per household. 43 persons have been reported missing to date. 35,705 livestock have been lost completely. 32,841 acres of productive land has been submerged. This is in the different counties. 35,073 houses or other households have reported destruction of their houses. Now, again, this is destruction either partially or completely. I'll explain again later on how we are going about to determine the different, or rather, the different types of destruction. 4,558 latrines have been destroyed, also in various counties. This is also one of the other pictures. This should be somewhere in Nyando. We remember there's the lake started backflowing in Nyando, a phenomena which we have seen in this magnitude sometimes back in around mid-60s. This is also a summary of what we have captured per region. And I'd like to say that these are Kenya Red Cross operational regions. They are very much highly aligned to the former provinces which we had. These were 8 provinces. The first one is Central Region, which has 8 counties affected by floods or effects of rains. I remember Florence talked about landslides. Yes, this was witnessed very much in Central Kenya, as well as West Pokot and Elgeyo Marakwet. It has a total of 1,308 households were displaced. So it follows that way: North Rift Region, South Rift Region, Upper Eastern Region, West Kenya Region, with a total of 46,149. And you can see the camps for the displaced. Coast Region and West Kenya regions have the highest, with West Kenya regions having a total of 1,133 displaced camps. So in total, we had 262 displaced camps, which Kenya Red Cross, we are responding to in one way or the other through provision, of course, of a relief, food, medical services, and the likes. 18 camps have been closed to date, remaining with 237 active camps. So in total, 43 counties out of 47, they have been affected by floods. So an estimated of 329,810 people have been affected. So what have we done so far? We have proceeded again to provide relief in different approaches. We have been doing structured assessments of the impacts, the effects, and of course the needs, so that it can inform our response actions. Then we have been doing what we call cash voucher assistance, which we have done so far to 1,110. This is actual transfer of money through M-Pesa, 5,400 shillings per household. Then we have done shelter, non-food items. This is emergency shelter support, where we give small tents for a family of 5. We give household items for cooking and preparing food. We give beddings like blankets. Then we give mosquito nets. We give jerry cans to restore water at household level. We give mosquito nets and also sleeping mats. Then we have been distributing food. We have been doing health and nutrition interventions. And we have been doing water, sanitation and hygiene, like now providing latrine slabs, supporting building or reconstructing of latrines. And then most importantly, we are doing what we call Kenya Initial Rapid Assessment activity. This is an agreed assessment procedure, which was agreed by various humanitarian agencies in the country, of course, including UN agencies. This is a tool which is supposed to identify the effects of disasters like floods 14 days after the impact, and then come up with the need. So we are hosting this as Kenya Red Cross, and we are doing in the 14 most affected counties. I want to say now, coming back to shelter issues, this is the budget of the needs in summary as at now, because we expect to support those who have been displaced with emergency shelter support. The kit I was talking about, including tents and all that, which is totaling to around 160 million to support 13,000 households, which we think they are very much in need. The other needs are around health, water, sanitation, and food. And this is as per the current floods. But Florence, allow me also to just to run through one of these so that we come closer to shelter as much as possible. These are houses which we have constructed in various counties before. I'll give you a very short story about them. I hope members have been able to see. In 2018, we had massive flooding in Kenya, which affected 39 counties. But the main effects was destruction of houses. There was very serious destruction of houses, total destruction of 6,729 houses across the 39 counties. Now, we worked with the Kenya government, which supported with 1 billion shillings to support mostly reconstruction of houses, health, water and sanitation, and other livelihood support. And we picked up an approach which we call PASA, Participatory Approach to Safe Shelter. This is where we come and work with the communities which have been affected to assist them build back what they had lost, not necessarily in the same way, but build back better, which means even selecting the location, a better location which has low risk to floods. So we succeeded to construct 4,386 houses across the country. And this PASA, Participatory Approach to Safe Shelter, it is aimed at working with the community because they'll have to come in and support one way or the other in terms of maybe contributing labor and things like that. But most importantly, also you aim at utilizing locally available materials in those areas, and then also doing considering the cultural acceptance of the building, not really running away from what they had before, but doing a building which is better and which can withstand floods in case, or which is built on a very lower risk area. So you can see all these houses, they look different because we are working with the communities in different areas to work to try and identify what they have or what they'll be comfortable with. But we come in and maybe work with doing a better structure in terms of the structural integrity, and also improving one way or the other. So they are very much different. And I can simply say, in terms of the whole project, because I was managing the project, there are various challenges which we faced. For example, from the word go, in terms of coming up with very proper BQs, or you call them BOQs, so that we can be able to fit in the requirement as per the various needs in each county, working around the culture and all that. For example, as I finish, you can see the Samburu. The Samburu structure, this from the word go, it looks like maybe a temporary building, but this is a fairly permanent one because these are wire meshes were side by side, but inside there are those flat stones which are available locally there. And these houses, they prefer this structure because it allows cooling, and it allows a structure with some fair amount of integrity. At the same time, culturally, it is very much acceptable. So, for example, drawing now the plan which is culturally accepted and things like that, and also working within a very tight budget is some of the challenges which I can see professionals like architects can come in and support. So I beg to end there and maybe clarify anything through the question and answer later on. Thank you, Florence.
Thank you so much, Richard Major, very much for your presentation and really setting the pace and letting us know in terms of the statistics on what is actually happening on the ground, as well as the efforts that have already been put to try and mitigate the risks that were there before. We're very happy to see some form of construction that has taken place, and I believe it now sets the pace for our discussion. Moving forward, I would also like to invite Franklin Karimi, who is Kirimi, sorry, from Conquer Design Initiative. Conquer Design Initiative is a community development and design non-profit which works with the underprivileged communities to ensure that equity and to activate good things on the ground. And I believe they have done a lot of work in the area of flooding, especially in Kibera. I would like you to invite you, Franklin, to make your presentation and also discuss some of the efforts that you have put in place in Kibera. Karibu.
Thank you very much, Florence. And thank you to Madam President and AAK in general for giving us this opportunity to present some of our work. Allow me to share my screen and present briefly a project that is flood related that we've taken part in. So as you've mentioned, Florence, Conquer Design Initiative is a non-profit that partners with vulnerable communities to advance equity. And while we know Kibera, like many other settlements, face many challenges, KDI has worked together with these communities in small-scale public space projects, flood management, and environmental remediation infrastructure to navigate these constraints. And specifically to flooding, we've observed that there are certain underlying factors that result in them being more prone to flooding, and these include poor drainage, the pattern that the settlements are alongside the riverine, and the single-sectored slum upgrading approach. So we embarked back in 2015 after a period of flooding that was experienced in citywide and I think countrywide as well, and really affected people in Kibera. We embarked on a project that we realized that we would need to look into ways that and approaches that we could apply in spatial planning for flood alleviation, but that also incorporates the rights and priorities of slum dwellers who are in these flood-prone areas. So, embarked by our household surveys, during the research, we established that urban poor are more vulnerable to flood risk. Further, we also noted that community-led support is needed to build their adaptive efforts that continue to face financial and legal setbacks. So this project is a 4-stage project that combines aspects of community, or what I would call lay knowledge, and expert knowledge, and that would be essential in building the capacity of institutional stakeholders. So we developed a toolkit that became a model of combining this knowledge into a consultative urban development framework. And to start off, we started from the ground level, started from the community all the way up into building national and international framework. And through community workshops, we collected data that we also verified. We also participated in community information sharing sessions on vulnerability to flooding and other challenges. We identified that there are there existing disaster risk management systems within the community, and also offered us an opportunity to do community awareness. Further, we noted that we needed to develop a flood model that would be essential to identify these hotspots, simulate scenarios, and create community awareness. Therefore, a live open source model that would be easily accessible through an easy to use software by different institutions and stakeholders would facilitate the adoption and easy integration of flood risk in infrastructure planning. In our own project, which was a pilot within this project, we applied the output of this model combined with our core design process by engaging the community members to develop a flood adaptive design in the area called Andolo. And this space offered community amenities that are accessible to the entire community. Further, we went to the now like national level where we did advocacy, and through institutional mapping, we're able to engage different stakeholders and different parties in a way that we went into partnerships with Nairobi City County. We recently have seen Nairobi City County and Nairobi Disaster Risk Hub also sign an MOU to this. And one of the successes of this project is that we continue to apply the outcome of this model to develop flood compatible spaces. We've also seen that the government organizations are also adapting and using this through our consultative approaches and also our consultations. So recently we've also engaged with the Kenya Urban Roads Authority, the Nairobi City County Department of Public Works as well. And this is at the end here, this is the result of that engagement exercise in Andolo, where we built a public space that was just recently completed. Thank you, Florence.
Thank you very much, Franklin. It's very exciting to get to know the work that you have been doing with Concrete Design. And I mean, I've picked those 4 things that there's need to participate, which we've also heard from Red Cross. There's need to model these things, and therefore the use of technology is very critical. And then there's need to build, in this particular case, to actually showcase what some of those models can do on the ground, and then advocate so that you're able to reach a much wider a group of people and influence even in levels of policy and in levels of government on the same thing. So thank you very much, Franklin, for that. And we look forward to hearing a bit more even during the panel discussion. This next session will now be the panel session. We had expected to have a few members of the public who have been directly affected by the floods coming on board, but at the moment they've not been able to join us because there are definitely great challenges where they are, considering that they have been displaced from where they're staying. So the challenges are expected there. So we hope probably towards the end of this particular session, we will be able to hear from them. I will now invite our moderator for the panel session. This will be architect Arthur Adair. Arthur Adair is a landscape architect and he teaches at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He is also a director of design and delivery with Athena Properties and a very well-known sketch artist. I follow his sketches on social media and very good with the pen and watercolor. So Arthur Adair, this is the opportunity. Karibu sana. He will then introduce the rest of the panel as we go forward. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Florence. I noticed you introduced me as architect Arthur Adair and then said I am a landscape architect. So thank you for confusing the attendees. But I do tend to straddle both divides and thus have a lot of interest in issues of flooding. So I'll just allow the panelists to very quickly introduce themselves just in less than 10 seconds, just your name, what you do, where you are, and then I'll dive right into my questions. I think it will be an easier introduction that way. So I'll probably start with Dan. To unmute, you need to unmute, Dan. You're on mute.
Hey, thank you, Arthur. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Dan Nyandega. I'm a landscape architect. And right now I'm based in Melbourne, working with CRC for water sensitive cities. And that's why I'm very much interested in this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll then go to Sunday Abuje.
Thank you very much, Asha. My name is Sunday Abuje. I'm a landscape architect, environmental planner, and also lecturer at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture.
Sante, Linda.
Thank you very much, Arthur. My name is Linda Njani. I'm an urban planner. More interested actually with a bottom-up approach towards solving the problems of cities. Thank you very much.
Okay, George. Rabu, I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Arthur. George Arabu, architect. I'm also the vice chair of the architects chapters, so I'm Florence's assistant. And first, let me say I'm here in the capacity of the appointment by the president to take up a very heavy task of chairing a task force that is going to humbly start working behind what Red Cross and KDR have already started doing, and happy to be here.
Okay, Engineer Josh.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Engineer Josh Wende. I'm a civil engineer. Right now, I'm a freelance consultant, consulting for various agencies, now the government of Ministry of Transport, based in Nairobi. Thank you very much for inviting me into this webinar. It's the first time I'm meeting architects, and it's very interesting that you're discussing a subject cutting across many professionals, particularly civil engineers. This is one area that we are normally interested in because it affects a lot of our built environments, roads, we have dams, we have even buildings, engineers are involved, and many other things. So it's interesting to be part of this webinar. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think Major has been introduced and Franklin has been introduced, so I'll just dive right into a couple of questions that could hopefully enhance the discussion. And maybe I'll just start with Franklin, who has just gone. In your presentation, I think maybe we gave you too little time and you were not able to go in depth into a couple of the issues. But we're very interested. I think one of the questions a number of people have been trying to understand is around the fact that this happens every year. Why is it that there are not any better risk matrices, or are those risks that we as professionals just miss? And what sort of work were you doing around mapping, especially, and mapping the risk and enhancing the flood risk management within the community?
Thank you, Ada. Yeah, there was a bit of a little time there, but I'll try and spend some more on this stuff. Back in 2015, when we had a lot of flooding, we started to map out the incidences of flooding, and we noted that there's a recurrence of people becoming victims of flooding and over time developing systems of being to adapt to the recurring floods. And it was even one of our questions of why do people continue to stay in these spaces, and why do they year in, year out experience the same? And we realized that there's a multi-tier or multi-level engagement that needs to happen for us to realize that the resilience that is required. And at community level, we noted that the community in itself, individuals or households, have a way of building their resilience to flooding. And so our mapping exercise was, one, to map at community level, what are they able to do? And then at municipal level, or what we even did as an organization by building a one-dimension model to see as they do those impacts that are reported by the community, do they relate, do they correlate? And that was the verification and the mapping exercise.
All right, thank you. And maybe I'll just kind of jump directly across to Arabu, who as a young architect, sorry, I'm calling you young, were very interested in understanding more about how you can assist with flooding, and what inspired you to set up the task force. And right now, seeing some of the work that Red Cross has done, some of the work KDI has done, what sort of early ideas do you have?
Thanks, moderator. I would say I didn't set up the task force. The association, I would say it's a collective wisdom of the association. And really just to, the little information we've picked today, I'm saying little because Major and Franklin had a very short period of time to present. We, all of us, just like any other Kenyan, have been receiving this information from the news media. And most of the time what we receive is what I would just say sensational, in the sense that we don't actually get the statistics. We don't get the figures like what Major presented just earlier on. And a lot of times we see it because it's a perennial problem. We look at it and we imagine that it will go away again the next time. And once you start getting statistics like the number of fatalities, then it starts scaring you. Once you start getting a situation where the entire country, we're talking about something like almost 90% of the country is affected, then it starts scaring you. I got that information about Nzoia River bursting, and about 40,000, I think, households in overnight were affected. That was at that point the largest statistics in a very in one small area. And then we realized that every time, if you look at the statistics, is that the biggest, and I think Major has alluded to that, the biggest indicator is the loss of the housing structure or the shelter. Because once you lose that, it's like I would say the last stronghold for any family. Never mind the issue of livestock loss, the farmland being messed up. But once you have people running into a house to shelter from the rain or high waters, and then that is also taken away, then we get to a critical point where we say that how then do we help these people? Because I can easily reconstruct, go back to the farm and dig. I could easily go and pick up the pieces and start over. But once you lose your shelter, you're also risking your life. And so we felt that as built professionals, people in the built industry, particularly I will just speak for architects, we really have not done much other than musing at the news and looking at, say, we wish we could do that, maybe we could do this and that. So we coming in at a point where we realize that this problem is not going away. And theoretically, we believe these forces of nature, extreme weather, are things people have lived with for many years. The only difference with our situation is that it affects people negatively to an extent that it contributes to poverty, and the cycle goes on every year when it comes back again. So our intention here really is to look at how we can come in and basically ride on and improve on what has already been done and see what we can help out.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's interesting. And maybe as I wanted to kind of position you there, as I can move back to Major. And Major, I can tell you, even if I can't see the attendees, that the moment you started putting up the houses that you have built, that a lot of people started, must have been wondering how come this has been done and we didn't know. And a number of people must be feeling very embarrassed that they weren't there to offer support. But I would just like to know from you, and this question will be two-pronged because I'll follow it then up with Sunday, is you mentioned that a number of these designs were participatory, but you went through a process of selecting. Sometimes it's the same site, selecting new sites which were less prone to flooding. You also mentioned you had a challenge of BOQs. Just speak a little about the process that you go through and the professionals maybe that you use, or if you don't use professionals, any challenges to that. And then Sunday, you'll follow up by really beginning to see the opportunity for landscape to actually design floodable landscapes around some of those developments. So Major, speak a little on that, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. And yes, I'd like to agree with Arthur. I believe it was, is it Arthur who, no, it was George. George, yes, he has mentioned that the loss of shelter is quite a big blow to any family, because shelter is a very central facility in human life. So once you hear families have lost shelter, then they are really desperate. And that is a situation those 30-something families are facing as at now. In terms of the humanitarian work, shelter and food is usually very much less attractive because it's very costly. So in terms of when we are planning, when you are talking to partners, it is usually an area which many partners also think twice before they start venturing. So that is one challenge which we always face every time. Now, when we look at those houses, as you can see, they are fairly different. And as you guys, as experts in this, you may come in and say, yes, they have different structural integrity considerations and things like that. This is because this intervention is usually a relief kind of, it is a humanitarian intervention to provide, to give back that shelter in a very short time possible, and an appropriate shelter for that matter, considering the appropriateness of the need of that family and the appropriateness of the simple structural integrity, and also looking at some level of resilience towards the next flooding if it has to come. That is why we use this program. Again, it is called Participatory Approach to Self-Shelter Awareness. We move step by step with the affected communities in terms of identifying, first of all, what caused the destruction of this shelter. And therefore, how do we do risk reduction for the next shelter? So how do we select the new site? We select together. And then what were the materials which were used in the previous shelter, to an extent that it got destroyed so easily? Or what type of architecture, or what type of design, what type of plan was used before which made it get destroyed that easily? So we work step by step with them and identify and say, no, we need to use better materials, and these materials are available locally. We need to use better design, and this design we can improve this and that and this and that. And then we, of course, the site, we need to select a better site. Now, in the process, for the approach of build back better, we have every time brought on board experts to come and assist in doing the structural design or the drawings for that matter. And this, I will say, it was challenging because now we cannot do this, you cannot get the drawings from the community. We have to bring in the experts which come like Arthur, they come now as consultants, which we have to pay for them. So you can imagine in terms of these houses, they were costing between 160 and 200,000 shillings, except the last one, which was built in Solai. It was a different kind of project within a project, because it was supported by one government, which came in and said they want to build permanent houses for that. So those ones are different. But the others, we were doing a very, very strict budget, a very, very small budget of 160 to 200,000. So if an expert comes in and requests payment of 30,000, 40,000, then it becomes a challenge. So, and to some extent, we are forced now to follow the county administration to support us with their experts. And sometimes you don't get these experts on time. Sometimes when you get them, they don't do the work we may want, simply because the payment is not as good, and things like that. So, but you can see there's a lot which can be improved by, for example, if the expert can come and work together with us from the planning stage. For example, I talked about now we are doing assessment. This assessment, we are identifying those houses which have been destroyed completely and those ones which are partially destroyed. As experts, we may see that some, for those which are partially destroyed, they may require just some partial type of support so that they can come back to habitable standards. So you can see that there's a saving of cost there, because you don't come to start destroying that one and then building a new one. So for example, if we start working together from that stage in the assessment, then from there, the landscape guy can come and tell us, now, this is, we need, the better site is this one. And then we come and do designing together, of course, with the community. And then by the end of the day, we can be able to do better buildings, maybe at a relatively cheaper cost, and we still achieve the objectives. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Sandy, I think that's a good segue for you, because you're now being challenged in terms of how will you assist with the assessment, but then how would you then share some of your expertise and knowledge in terms of designing this new suitable sites?
Thank you, Arthur. And true. What is mentioned is very critical. I drew a lot of inspiration from one neighborhood in Nigeria called Makoko, which is an entirely floating informal settlement. And these people are able to trade, they're able to conduct social activities, they're able to basically extract their food and all from the environment. There's a very big opportunity that exists for this to be able to happen. And one of the key things that is critical is the development of what I refer to as floodable landscapes, so that we appreciate the fact that the floods are likely to come. There are people who can move, there are people who may not be able to move. How are we able then to fit the environment to suit those who cannot be able to move? So floodable environments or landscapes would basically allow development and conducting of social agricultural activities to continue. And if the floods come, then the selection of the different species and planting materials, and even the identification of the locations to put them, will have already been predetermined in the planning process. And that can therefore very easily avoid the critical loss, especially of, for example, livestock, critical loss of plant materials, critical loss of farm inputs and all that. The second critical opportunity that I see that exists is, and this is in conjunction, of course, with the other professionals, is the development of what I refer to as elevated landscapes. If, for instance, and one of the key things I think that was mentioned earlier is that some of these people are not able to move because they don't have alternative places to go. So is it possible then for our professions to be able to find a way in which these people can still habit these environments and live, for example, maybe even above the water? And as they live above the water, are they able to proceed with their normal activities? If it is small-scale farming activities, can those still be able to take place? And then finally, Another critical component that I think is also a very good opportunity for us is to try and have a little bit more functionality into some of the government initiatives that exist, like, for example, the Dikes, the gabions that are already being put in places like Ahero, the Dikes in Budalangi, and desiltation programs that already exist. Because if you bring together all the professions in the built environment, then they are able to turn some of these almost mechanical kind of activities into very critical landscapes and opportunities that can, first of all, enhance the adaptability of those people in flooded areas, but also increase more opportunity for them to enhance their resilience.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, Major, I've just seen somebody who is ready to donate some of his time towards supporting and reducing that 30,000 per house that your consultants are looking for. I'll just maybe jump across to Dan. I hope he's still awake in Melbourne, and maybe Dan could share a bit. We have seen some real studies on this end, and we know you are involved in some work across there. And maybe you can share some of the experiences that you're learning, but also some of the experiences that you're teaching them. Because I know before you went there, you did some work around the Budalangi area, and you supervised a number of students. So I'm sure you're not just absorbing, but teaching. Share a little with the panel and the webinar.
All right. Thank you, Arthur. So I think I'll look at it from, because first of all, I'm a lecturer, but also a practitioner as a landscape architect. We're now focusing majorly on design-based kind of research. So while in Monash, while in JQuat, so I supervised two projects. So one was based in Budalangi, and then another one was based in Naro. And both of them were really focusing on how you can really use landscape intervention to really be able to make an impact. And what I would say, the project were really, really successful. What I think we failed to really do is to be able to share them with the people who need them the most, because I think that is where we really need to begin from as lecturers who are teaching these students, so that we can be able to really tap into the good brains which these students have to really generate ideas which can therefore be shared out there, then we can be able to use to really help. And then the other thing, maybe just going to my international experience. So for the last 4 years, I've been doing a lot of design research with Cooperative Research Center for Water Sensitive Cities, which is based in Melbourne. And just to draw the comparison, so Melbourne is really very similar to Nairobi in the sense that it's a city built in a swamp. And Nairobi, pretty much as you all know, is also a swamp city. And what I've seen, which is very critical, is therefore just looking at water as the excess water and lack of it as two sides of the same coin. So at the same time, right now we are really having a lot of discussion about the floods, but then maybe in a few months' time, we won't have water, and therefore we'll have the scarce water. So how can we be able to solve this problem, but also solve the other one where we don't have water? And the other thing, which I think is also very critical, is more of evidence-based kind of design interventions, because what we've been doing is really collect data. And that's why I was very impressed with Franklin's discussion, where you really use models to be able to be for architects to develop different building typologies, which can be able to really allow water to penetrate, and so that you're not really pushing water away. Because again, if you look at Nairobi, for example, simply what we call flood is just water really coming back to occupy its territory, which we took over. So we should be able to really figure out how can we develop architectural building typologies which can be able to really enable us to live with water. And then maybe the other thing is about the possibility of catchment thinking, where if we can look at Nairobi more as a catchment, but then we break it down into sub-catchments, So when I talk of subcatchment, what I mean is you can say CBD is a subcatchment and can catch its own water. And then we trickle down to a level where you look at a building by itself as another smaller component of catchment. So if you do that, then we are able to really understand it from very broad perspective, but then you bring it closer home. And then that way, each and every household will be able to understand that they make a contribution to the flooding. And therefore you need to really be able to do something at your level. And then, and from that, we'll be able to shift attention from, what would I call it? Looking at water as a problem. But also when you do that, then now you also shift attention where you now spend money where you can be able to see it. Because a lot of what we see around is just drain water, take it to the drain, and then out of sight, out of mind. But then if you can be able to really be able to reconfigure that, where we bring water to the surface, we can be able to see it, then it won't be so much of a problem. And that goes back to what Abuja was talking about of floodable landscape, where if you can bring it to urban context, and I think it will be able to make a lot of sense. And I think the other thing which maybe on my final comment is more of integrated kind of water planning, where you not just do urban planning, but you also do urban planning in conjunction with water planning. Then if you're able to integrate them, then it makes much more sense as opposed to just doing urban planning and then you leave water to other people. I think that should really be able to add a lot of value. So thank you, Arthur. I know the time is short, but I will be happy to share much more. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I know, I think we need to say again, this is really an introduction to a number of these things, and we will be revisiting a number of issues. Maybe I'll just jump back to Linda. And the reason I said jumping back is because Linda is a planner. And I know, Linda, you're very interested in floods within urban areas. And maybe just to give a context really of why, what causes some of this flooding within urban areas. I know you've done some work in Narok, Nairobi, and probably that can help us reframe some of the questions as we get back around. So, Linda.
Thank you, Arthur. Actually, I like how Dan actually put it, that we need to start looking at water as a resource and not something that we all the time are trying to resist. And also as we like start this discussion, I like the way we are approaching it, and that's how I'm looking at the flood problem. I'm looking at it like multifaceted, it's interconnected, and it's complex, and we cannot, as one professional, like an architect or an urban planner, pretend that we can sit back and try to solve the problems of flooding. And that's why I applaud George and actually the Architectural Association of Kenya for taking time to see that towards achieving a sustainable future on how we can manage floods, then it's important that we start looking at this problem from multifaceted dimensions. All professionals and everybody actually has a role to play towards solving the problem of flooding. Also the country, we need to look at it from the broad perspective, because some of these issues that we experience actually are so interconnected to the level of destruction of the water catchment areas. We can allude that to the increased population maybe. Also our farming practices, we can say, haven't been very good. And so it's a multi-connected whole thing that we cannot just pretend to look at it from one dimension. And you ask an interesting question of what causes floods in urban areas. Of course, everybody knows, I assume, what causes floods. We are currently experiencing a climate shift, heavy rainfalls, rise in tidal waves. Also, we have an increment in the built-up areas. So we have a lot of paved spaces, where initially there were open spaces that will allow for seepage of water. Also, Nairobi, for instance, we have witnessed an increment or an upsurge in the amount of water that is flood runways. Our drainage system, we can say, is not yet up to par with what it's supposed to be. Also, there's a lot of deforestation going on. And of course, we lack an agency that can implement the integrated flood control measures that we suggest all the time, although not very connected. Yeah, that's what I can just point out, Arthur.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That engineer, I heard that our drainage systems are not yet up to par. You are the engineer on the panel, so I have to turn to you, and maybe you can try and tie together some of the discussions happening, but jumping from that drainage question.
Yeah, thank you very much. In terms of drainage, as Dan and I think one of the contributors clearly indicated, we need to start from really organizing the data which is available. Of course, there's not much the collection or storing of data which relates to flooding are not okay. It's not very good, but we have some data at least. So we need to really analyze all the data and establish some flood mappings for various places which are prone to flood, like the lake region, coastal region. Actually, we need to identify the sources of the flood. And, you know, we talk of a flood of, say, 100 years flood. I think the kind of flood we have just experienced recently must have been experienced maybe some 60 years ago. So there's a chance that in 100 years, we were likely to have this kind of a flood magnitude. So we need to just consolidate our data, which relates to flooding. We need to identify the sources of these floods, like which rivers are prone to flooding, the nature and severity. That comes from proper analysis of this data. As engineers, we face problems, especially when you're doing some, you're designing a dam in a particular remote place. Getting the data which is consistent is a problem. So we need to, the government, there needs to be some flood mapping. Then we need, for builders, for architects, and for the built environments, we need to properly select the sites. And this closely relates to regulatory requirements. Like, do we have some regulations which tell us we cannot have people settling in a particular place? The flood levels, the flood plains, these are well marked, so that we don't end up in a situation whereby there's a full settlement, land is properly secured by people in such places, but they are actually flood plains which are hazards. So the government needs to do a lot in terms of regulation to map the flood-prone areas, set the levels above which people should not really settle or undertake some activities. So these are all about planning, and I think we just need to consolidate much of the data we have to plan.
Dan, I want to come back to you, and one of the key things, as soon as this webinar was announced, I started getting messages on my phone, and again, I think this is something that's been spoken about, but I think we need to reinforce it so that, especially as people in the built environment, we can begin to take some serious consideration. And I think you partially mentioned it, engineers partially mentioned it, Linda has partially mentioned it. I think I wanted to cover drainage. Asked a question to where, and I don't know if you want to speak to that.
think I lost.
And just reinforce the point on how, oh, sorry. I'm just saying to reinforce the point on how by taking a look at this from the individual scale to the global scale, you begin to understand that drainage alone cannot be the problem. Maybe you can speak a little to that. I hope you didn't miss too much of the question.
Yeah, now I got your question. Yeah, I think if I bring it back to Nairobi, what I would say is, for example, we've just talked about drainage being a problem. But then the question we ask yourself is, why is drainage a problem? It is a problem because we dump waste into the drainage system. So that again begins from individual perspective. But then at the same time, if you now bring it up to the household level, it also more about, because a lot of time we do the design and all you want to do is drain water away from your compound and take it to the municipal kind of drainage system. So out of sight, out of mind, life goes on. So you do not know what's going to happen there. But then if everybody does that, cumulatively, it ends up in flood downstream. So that's why I was making reference to, if we can be able to think of a city as a catchment by itself, but then that catchment has different sub-catchments. So which means if you say the CBD is a catchment, and then you say Westland is a catchment, and then you say maybe Ngong Road somewhere is also a catchment by itself. So it deals with water in those particular areas. And then I think that makes it much more easy to manage, as opposed to just thinking of water as, well, we have the whole city, and then now let's deal with water as one whole big problem. It becomes much bigger issue. So that is what I was making reference to. So, and then the other thing is, because if you go to water, of course, there's a flooding, which is a problem, but there's also other water-related problem, which comes in terms of the amount of water you consume in the house, how long you take when you're taking shower, that water goes somewhere, and that also creates a lot of problems. So it also comes back to the change of lifestyle. How much water do you use to take shower? How much water do you use to wash your clothes? So it's a much bigger and much more complex problem, as beyond just looking at floods. Yeah. Okay.
Franklin, and maybe this is going to the KDI question. I'm seeing a question asking, it was actually asking the engineer about flooding data. Now, we know that you worked quite significantly on the river in Kibera. I think that project was over a 2-year period. What data did you find around flooding, and what kind of data did you generate?
It lasted 2 years, and we did household survey, one comparing areas that are reported to have flooded, but as well as comparing that against income. So we did collect data from about 900 households, and both doing pre the rainfall and then post rainfall period. And we collected data that one surprisingly thing was that flooding did not only occur along the rivers as we had thought before, but also there was localized flooding away upstream or in higher ground. And this is as a result of drainage, where due to also lacking waste management, we have a resultant of flooding within those households. So we realized that flooding also is occurring off along the riverine and also away from that. And I think that started to show us that this flooding may seem as a one climate related issue, but also it's connected to other infrastructure problems, such as lacking waste management system.
Okay. Maybe now I could go back to Abuja. Sorry, no, to Arabu, because this is really about, I think Major mentioned it, the most visible and immediate solution that comes into mind as a layperson is the house or the home. how can we start thinking about architects, QSs, planners, engineers, supporting some of the work similar to what Major and Red Cross have been doing, and some of the government initiatives along Tana River, Budalangi? Any thoughts on that, or how you might want to engage those organizations further?
Thanks, Arthur. It's coming out very clear that there's a lot of thoughts that have gone into what has been done so far. I would like to appreciate the fact that we have some data from KDI, for example, but from us, it might not be widespread, but at least localized in Nairobi. We also have the challenges of now the geographical context of the rural areas, and as you mentioned, Budalangi and Tana River. And I would say that again, Major and Red Cross have done a lot of work in those what I call the rural context. From what I gather, the challenges which I'm picking out straight away right now, of course, the biggest is that of finance, where we are looking at a situation where you need to get back on your feet and build your shelter, and yet finances, you don't have sufficient finances, and Red Cross and other agencies are coming in to provide this well-needed support. Major has also mentioned this budget. We're talking about less than 200,000 for a house. I mean, for any architect based in Nairobi, if someone in the rural area calls you and tells you I have 200,000 to build a house, even on a nice sunny dry day, you will probably say, I'm not coming, it's too much. And this is where now for us, we have the numbers. I think we need to work on this from an aspect of numbers, because as an individual, for example, I might not have resources to be able to support what Major is doing, but as an association, I think we have the capacity, for instance, to develop a sufficient, good enough number of typologies that can actually be adapted based on cultural issues, financial issues, and other geographical conditions that can be adopted to the various situations. I think moving forward, and we've actually discussed this in the task force on a separate meeting, was that some of the short-term measures, and I would imagine the planning issues, the urban context are mostly long-term given the intricacies. But if you look at the rural context, looking at a situation where someone within 1 week, I think we heard from one of the affected person in Ahero that within 1 week the water has receded, but then your house is gone maybe. So for a short-term measure, it is actually possible for us to come up with typology, and we can put together like a design guide, and which then even Major can take to the community, and the people can build by themselves. Because how I look at it is like the local fundi has overrun the market, and they're able to build it, to build what they're building. It's just that they're not sufficiently addressing the resilience that is required for the floods. So if we say that we can come up with the typologies right now, and then we prepare some sort of a guideline, a guidebook, and a book of designs, it's very possible for us to even have, for every county that has been affected, on, may I even dare say, every community, looking at the cultural nuances which we cannot definitely avoid, we can come up with a typology that, for example, someone in Marsabit, in a particular clan, could be able to build very fast, that is both answering their needs culturally, but at the same time, the requirements of the floods. Let me just finally say that, remember when we are doing a house, the houses have typically a lifespan of 50 years plus. So I would say that any area that has been affected by floods right now, and even if the last time the floods were happening was 60 years ago, it will still make a lot of sense to come up with a type of a house that addresses floods. Because there's a chance that 60 years from today, that house will still be standing and the floods may just occur. And that one incidence of floods could render a livelihood gone completely. So it will be very much worth it to invest time and resources and professionalism from our side to be able to come up with this typology, and someone can pull it out from their a public domain and be able to execute. Thank you, Aka.
Thank you very much, Abuje. And I think I'll maybe have two more questions to the panel, and then we'll try and have some final wrap-up discussions. I wonder if it's only me who is feeling like this could go on for 4 or 5 more hours. I would be very interested in continuing the discussion, but I know we had until just about 5 p.m. So I want to try and make sure we run through a few things quickly. I'm just seeing some questions coming through, and Abuje, maybe just to set you up. I think one of the key things is there seems to be a lot of discussion around the fact, this is especially in Western Kenya, about building dikes and doing buildings on stilts, but we know that's costly and this can be washed away. Zananomira Satendi asking, how can we have some resilient planning so that we have long-term systems? I don't know if I've asked that question right, but there are similar questions that are being asked, especially around that, so that we're really looking at resilient planning. This might be different for urban and rural areas. So Abuje, maybe you can just chip in there.
Okay, maybe if I start with the Budalangi situation and give a bit of background, there are 2 issues and 2 main challenges. One more recent is the lake backflow, and the more common one, of course, is the fluvial and the fluvial flooding that happens in Budalangi. One interesting thing that I noted in the Budalangi area is that one of the key things we're saying is that currently they haven't experienced extraordinary rainfall, but they have experienced extraordinary flooding. So most of this is being attributed to upstream activities. They're saying that where this water is coming from, most of the forests have been cleared, most of the vegetation along the rivers has been replaced with cash crops. And therefore, this means that all the rain that falls upstream flows downstream. So one of the key things that has to happen, especially at a much broader perspective and at the planning perspective, is to consider a very global approach. So that we are not just building dikes in Budalangi, but we are also doing something towards Mount Elgon. We are redoing our forests, we are encouraging riparian conservation. And then downstream, we are also probably minimizing encroachment, because this is again another thing that is happening as population pressure increases. People are looking for new lands to settle, and one of the most opportune lands to settle in and conduct agriculture is the riparian land. So it's a mix of both very long-term planning in terms of how do you map areas and conserve natural environments, with a very futuristic look towards minimizing the amount of water that ends up downstream. And this is in conjunction with what Dan was talking about in the urban areas, that if you break down the specific catchment areas and you're looking at westlands and the likes, now in the rural areas, it is much bigger. If you're looking at the catchment area, where does most of this rainfall fall, and what can we do at that particular place in order to minimize the amount of water that ends up downstream? The other critical thing that I've also noted, and especially in the area of Ahero, there are certain initiatives that are already taking place in terms of trying to deal with the challenges of flooding. For instance, the building of dikes, like I indicated earlier. There was an initiative called Flood for Work Initiative, where people are encouraged to dig drainage channels and they would be paid for it. There were, for example, investments in construction of gabions and so on. However, that was at the point at which people are experiencing that challenge. So mapping remains a very key planning perspective that has to be taken into account. The other key perspective that also has to be taken into account is the establishment of very specific early warning systems. And by specific, I mean, we don't just say that we are going to experience extreme rainfall in the Budalangi area. Are you able to be very specific where you're telling people that you live 50 or 100 meters from the river, then within the next 1 week, your particular area is likely to be flooded? All this is only possible if we embrace very broad planning and also incorporating other professions and other tools, like, for example, mapping is a very, very key tool in determining flood-prone areas and maybe sources of the flood risks that you're likely to have.
Thanks. Engineer, there's a question which I know I've noted you've started responding to in the chat, but maybe there was one question around flooding data. And I think it was a very poignant question. It asked, since independence in 1963, Kenya does not have flooding data. So what facts and specifications does the government use to build dikes and dams? I know you had started responding to that. Maybe you can verbalize a little bit more on it.
Yeah, we have different med stations which keep records of like river flows against rainfall events, rainfall data for every day. And so we have a set of data which you could find running for 50 years ago, 60 years for some stations. And that provides very valuable information, especially for particular rivers where major works have to be undertaken, including these flood mitigation measures. For some of the dams which have been designed, of course, they use this data to analyze, to model the likely flood events for 100 years or like that. When you say 100 years flood, is about 1% chance that such a flood is likely to occur in any given year. It's not that that flood will occur in 100 years. It's a 1% chance that this year the flood will occur, next year. So these are extreme flood events. And these are used for especially sensitive areas which are prone to flooding, sensitive projects like hydropowers, sensitive those multipurpose dams. So indeed we have some data, but from the look of things, the downstream river management flood protection measures, I really doubt whether such data have been used to like typically design dikes and construct the dikes. They look very temporary measures which kind of hoodwinks people that probably are safe, but when the next flood comes, all our houses goes, all our crops go, and we face the same perennial problem. So I think there needs to be some. This data needs to be. I'm saying that this data is available in just some rivers. It's not that you go to some other places like Marsabit. You may find it very difficult to get data on a river like there's a stream where like Badaza Dam is being planned. You have to rely on some other similar rivers far away from that place of similar characteristics. But that particular river, you don't have such kind of data which you can use for planning or for design. So the government needs to really put more effort, especially on managing these catchments, river catchments, to keep very good record, institute record taking and keeping for this, and analysis for these water bodies. So I really doubt. My response is I doubt that much of the data available has been used for some of these costly measures which have been taken in, say, Budalangi to construct these dikes. It's not really, it's just like you get some community data, like record that the last time the flood was up to this level, so let's construct the levees up to the dikes up to this height. But they're not really well backed, and the materials used for these constructions are not that sound. I believe also we also need to, when you're constructing dikes, you also need to consider geotechnical investigations. I wonder whether such are considered in such cases, because the dikes need to have foundations, not just the flood levels, but foundations. They need to be well grounded, so when the floods come, they have the resilience against the forces of the floods.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, we will not tackle this exhaustively, but I'm sure everybody also attending would realize that this would just be an introduction. What I just want to go through is very quickly give the panelists at least 1.5 minutes to have some closing remarks. And maybe I will start with Linda.
Thank you, Abba. So what I'm starting to really look at towards the solution of the flooding problem is actually the city and the country at large to come up with a comprehensive, sustainable storm water management plan. And this can be actually done in 2 tiers. We could start with having a comprehensive drainage master plan for the cities and the urban areas, and also have the same for the rural areas. And I know this already is ongoing. For instance, we have the National Spatial Plan that clearly maps out the areas that are most probable to experience floods, and which are the catchment areas, and which are the areas to be protected. And that's why I was mentioning the last time that we need to start looking at this problem in a multi-connected way. We can't look at it from one-sided perspective. And also I'm looking at opportunity or probably a way in which we can start looking at the city towards, like channeling the drainage water, the storm water, and then channeling it to particular areas where they will be less destructive. For example, starting to construct drainage or water retention ponds, for example, that could be used as play fields in the drier days, for example. And also I'm looking at also diverting these waters through the use of some roads that are not maybe functional when it rains. So it deliberately channeling the water to another place away from the people. And this definitely then requires a lot of funding, I know, but also discussions from all levels. Also know that the National Assembly and also I think the government has been putting a lot of efforts into the protection of riparian areas towards solving some of these problems. And this, I think, started around 2018 when we experienced higher flooding in the country. And I know also they are trying to enforce some regulations that will prevent settling and encroachment of the riparian areas, and also how well to manage this flooding problem. But I must say, as my parting shot, then it's important that we start looking at the city having the capability of solving our problems, everybody's problems. Everybody who lives in the city actually has an opportunity with the city, but it's for us all to now start seeing how do we come in, how do we not sit in the fence, and how do we just come in and start harnessing our different potentials and our different ideas towards solving the city's problems.
Thank you very much. I just noticed our time is not very good. So for the rest of the parting shots, I will want to challenge you to give me one sentence or maybe one word that we can take home so that we have a little bit of time at the end to wrap up. So I will go to Arabu. One word, one sentence.
All right, thanks, moderator. I'm just gonna say that I'm looking forward to at the time when we work with the other agencies that are already working on this to transform the neighborhoods that are currently affected, such that they will not be devastated during the floods. But then we'll be seeing a different kind of livelihood. Maybe they'll be moving around in boats and they're living in their houses on stilts as opposed to suffering where they'll be. So it's just another weather condition. They will deal with it. I'm positive. Thank you.
Those are about 5 to 10 sentences, but thank you. Franklin.
Thank you, Arthur, and also thank you for having to share this panel with most of you who are my first lecturers. My one statement is that I think I've begun to see a pattern in the approaches and like-mindedness, and we've started to see things like flood risk assessment and participatory planning and flood mapping as things that we need to consider in planning. So I think that's the way to go.
Okay, I see you have followed Arabu's. So Abuje, I give you 5 sentences.
I'll do less. I'll do 3 words. Holistic approach and data. Thank you.
Asante. Dan, we've kept you up.
No, I'm all right. Yeah, I think what I will say is this is a very good initiative, but I will challenge all of us to take it to another level where the architects, landscape architect, engineers begin to play an activist role. And what I mean by that is you begin to, the way we started this, if we can develop some design initiative and take them to the community, they see it and then they see what can be done, they'll be able to push the politicians so that these things are realized. So that is my parting shot. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Engineer, parting shot. Engineer Josh, any parting words? One sentence.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you once again for this initiative. I think it'll go a long way in addressing a number of problems which have been affecting mostly the poor. And I think let the task force come up with solutions, hard solutions, but things which are practical and which, if implemented, have results. We have been treating a disease which we know, but using very mild, treatments. So let us address this with the criticality it deserves.
Okay, thank you. So, Major, I felt it was nice for us to end with you now that we started with you, and you can have a minute.
Thank you, Arthur, and again, thank you very much for AAK for having this initiative, and it cannot be any more timely. And I just want to inform everybody that mapping has been done for the hazards which affect shelter in this country, not necessarily floods only. We also have conflicts which lead to destruction of shelter, and as an organization, we have done mapping for the conflict high-risk areas and all the other emergencies too. And it is good to note that responding to mitigation, or rather mitigation to these effects to shelter and also supporting early recovery is fairly a I want to say multi-agency, but also multi-expertise approach, which is very much required because It comes all the way from the mitigation through responding, or rather supporting those who have been affected, and also supporting the recovery. I just want to mention that many other approaches have been done, but what has not been exploited, which we are seeing as we move on, is innovation. And the architect AAK, this is a very good team of experts. You need to embrace innovation in all aspects of dealing with this challenge around destruction of shelter. This is from even mapping itself, data, capturing data management, and also now aligning data towards the plans. If we can have any form of innovation, then of course working with the users like the humanitarian organizations to align these to the most needy, because we know the most affected are the people who are most vulnerable because they are economically challenged. This will put the whole thing of innovation together, and we'll be able to get solutions, and very many solutions to this problem. And with that, my parting shot is that Kenya Red Cross is a volunteer organization. And as I said, why should I go and pay 30,000 for a house which is 21 square meters, and yet I can have an architect around there who comes from that village? He can do that through a volunteer approach, and you can join. Just go to the website www.kenyaredcross.or.ke, and then just follow the instruction there, and you can join. And then we can work together in supporting those who have lost their shelter. Thank you, Ada.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all. The reason I rushed you was so that I can have enough time to now start giving my sermon. No, actually, no. But it has been a very, fantastic. It's been a very fantastic beginning. And I think one of the key things to reemphasize, and AAK are reminding me to reemphasize this is just the beginning of the task force. We've seen valid recommendations coming through. We've been told hydrologists, meteorologists, that word, I can't say it very well, meteorologists, we need to have them in the task force. The task force has just begun. I will let the officials talk a little bit more about that. I noted there were a lot of questions around climate change, around land tenure. This, as we've said, is just the beginning. So a lot of this information will be collated, the answers will be done. We will continue to develop and broaden both these conversations. It's not very easy to discuss all this in 1.5 hours. So with that, and biting my tongue, because I also have so many questions I would want to ask and so many thoughts, back to Florence.
Thank you very much, Arthur, and to the entire panelist team for a very wonderful engagement in terms of the various aspects of this particular issue. We've had a lot, we've seen a lot of questions also coming from the attendees, and I've already seen some of the panelists beginning to respond to them. I believe we will have more opportunities to respond to those particular questions, especially when we dive deep into this issue. I would now like to invite the chairperson of the Landscape Architects chapter. This is Landscape Architect Ambrose Ofafa, to give his closing remarks as well as a vote of thanks. Welcome, Ofafa.
Thank you very much, Architect Florence Nyore, for this opportunity to give my closing remarks and to thank the entire process for this. Number one, first of all, I'd like to thank AAK through the president, Architect Mugure Jendu, for organizing this and hosting this, as well as members of the Architectural Association of Kenya behind all this, that is Architect George Arabu, myself, Florence Nyore again, and ETC. I'd like to say that this is a very fantastic beginning. I'd like to echo landscape architect Arthur Adair, who is the moderator, as words that this is a very fantastic beginning for this. How I wish the president was part of the audience to listen to this, but of course, through the print media and everything, we understand why he's absent. He's attending to UN security matters. However, he, I'm sure, instructed the minister or the cabinet secretary for devolution to challenge various institutions to come up with a permanent solution. This was evident recently in one of the print medias to come up with this, and that's why this was organized. I like to say that flooding is a very wide topic, ranging from prevention of floods to responses, and that's why Red Cross and other institutions are coming in. I like to give special thanks to Major, that is retired. Throughout the entire process, I observed your face that was full of surprises, happiness. And one thing I like to mention is that I also noticed the curiosity in your face and shock that outside Red Cross government, that the built environment professions have a wide potential in solving floods as a menace, as well as looking at it as an opportunity that I've learned today. I'm talking also as an environmental planner that I've learned through some of the panelists that water can be seen as actually an opportunity. I like to say that it is necessary to recognize the potential, the expertise, the expertise that the panelists and the professions they represent possess in the built environment to tackle floods. It will be very important that this is tapped. I like to communicate this to members of the devolution ministry who are present or form part of the audience, to take this message to the relevant authorities that the built environment profession is extremely rich in terms of offering solutions to flooding, preventing floods, and seeing floods as an opportunity. It will be good if this is encouraged. I'd also like to thank members from as far as Uganda, members of the journalist team who are here, and most of the panelists for organizing this and to share this. I hope this is the beginning of a very long journey and to look at things differently. Thank you very much, Florence Nole.
Thank you so much, Ambrose, so much for this, for those comments and for giving us our closing remarks. Indeed, this only marks the end of this particular session, but marks the beginning of us as a team working towards ensuring that we look at this critically. We rest on the information that has been shared by Red Cross as well as KDI and the engineer regarding this particular issue, as well as the expertise from Dan, all the way from Melbourne. And I really wish to thank this particular panel that has been put together aptly by Architect George Arabu, who will be guiding the task force towards enabling the built environment professionals to engage further and to respond to this issue on flooding. Without much further ado, I wish to thank everyone who has joined us this afternoon. Thank you for your time and your patience. We will continue to respond to your questions via our social media handles, as well as our email address. And we look forward to having another session so that we can dive deep into this particular issue. And I wish everyone a good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. Have a blessed evening. You may leave at your own pleasure. That is.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Dan, or good morning.
Bye, Dan.
Bye-bye.
Good morning, Dan.
It's good night. I'll see you. I'll catch you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks.